Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Good morning, Suzanne.
Good morning, Bill. I had to check to see if my audio was on.
Yeah, I know. This is kind of weird this morning. I can't, they just came on too. And
Yeah, mine did too, and normally it doesn't.
Yeah.
But how are you today?
Oh, fine. And you?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Busy day today. So decided to just kind of, watch it this way.
Yeah.
But,
I sure would like to go over, but I have to leave here about 20 after 6, and
oh, that's early.
so, but I'm sure glad we have this though, and I think that for more and more people, as where it gets difficult to get there, it's good. So,
well, you've got a couple pretty active clubs in the Edina area.
no, I know, but the one there's the one in the, I can't remember whether it's luncheon or not, but it meets at Edina Country Club, and I've been there before for a couple of their meetings.
Oh, have you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I just don't want to, it's I don't want to start over with another group of people. And
yeah, there's there are a couple that are really fairly active in the Lake Street project.
Mm-hmm.
So I've gotten to know a few people, and yeah, they've got some really good members. They have one club that's really, I think it's the biggest club now in the district, and that's one of the Edina clubs. I can never remember. I think it's the Edina Noon Club.
Yeah, that's the one that I think is that one is that meets there, but I'm not positive. I can't remember now.
Yeah, that could be. That would make sense, because they'd have a place for lunch and everything. So yeah, that probably would be the one.
Okay.
Yeah,
good morning, Greg.
And they've been active in the on the what?
I think we'll get started recording.
Just Greg.
Hi, Bill.
Everybody keeps asking me, don't screw up, Cheater. Now I'm really getting nervous this morning. But anyway, first of all, I just want to tell you, this is not the beginning of my term, so don't get nervous, okay? We still have a little bit more Pam to go here for a few weeks, but we'll get started with our pledge of inspiration with Andrew Pinnock. Thanks, Andrew.
All right, you guys gotta help me out with this one. I pledge allegiance to the
United States of America. The Republic stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So hopefully you guys weren't like me this morning and just remember that you gotta do this today. So bear with me, but today I want to talk about don't go insane, embrace the change. So one of the quote from Oprah Winfrey is the greatest discovery of all time is that a person can change their future by merely changing their attitude. Things change in our world all the time. We have changes in seasons, you can change your job, gas prices change all the time, and that's fun. But it's all needed, right? Like we need to have that little bit of change in order to know where we are in life. And most of the time when we change something, we're changing it for the better. When was the last time you changed something and things got worse? Probably hard to think of a time or two when that happened. So just remind yourself that change is a good thing and it's a sign of growth, and don't fight it, because insanity is you do the same thing over and over again and expect the same result. That's the definition of insanity. So if you do the same thing over and over again, expect a different result or try and find a way to get a different result. Embrace the change this week. And a 4-way test. All the things you say that you do. This is fair, all concerned. Will it feel good, will it friendships? Will it be better for all?
Morning, everybody. This guy here. We have Dave Sunfire speaker over there from Cargill. Brent Lundell from the Bank Club here again. And Matt Vatnick here from Bridgewater Bank. And so he's gonna be coming in. Let's see, Ferris, Paul Hay. Did I get that right, Ferris? Very close. He's a guest of Mary and Ted. And then we have Paul Katzner, guest of Mary Keelan. We have Ann Hicks and Mary Jergens who were here, I think both last week or recently. They're back to check it out again. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, we got a few minutes, so ask the pig, any announcements this morning? For my Scott, do you have any announcements? You have to for events, right? Come on up. Sure.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So just kind of a quick recap from the concert last week. Just about everybody that I see was there. We had a lot of volunteers, which is always helpful. Sometimes we're running around and it's always good to have those extra hands. If you think that you're there and you don't have a job, trust me, we'll find something for you to do. Or a lot of you just kind of picked up and did your own thing. Where's Mike Cooper? There he is, the cup guy. So he was out. He had a stack of, he said 85 cups. He was going out in the crowd and collecting empty cups from people. That's great. By the way, the cup return rate for this past week was 95%. Clearly, in Minnesota, people like to follow the rules, right? Most people. So you really can't complain about that. That's some of the highest recovery levels that the company has seen anyway, really. Right, Lauren?
Breaking records.
Yep. And it's also well received by the community that we're doing the right thing as far as trying to work towards zero waste. As far as the event itself was fantastic. We had great weather. We netted after expenses over $30,000.
Wow.
It's not bad for 2-3 hours. That's all positive, but next Wednesday, a week from today, we have probably my favorite band, Viva Knievel. If you haven't seen them, you will absolutely love them. It's a rock party band. There's about 12 of them. It'll be a great night. So far, the weather's looking fantastic, 85 and sunny for next Wednesday, right? Because that's what we get. And the pavilion also will be dedicated to the extent it's fully open yet is unclear. But all the major construction work is done at that new pavilion. We're doing some planting over there. So we're looking forward to the rest of the year over there and having some additional space for everybody to spread out in some fun time. So that's the update. And thank you for all your help. Appreciate it.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Wagner, and I just want to remind those of you who are newer members to our club that we will be gathering just briefly outside after the meeting in case you have any questions. Just want to chat about things with the club, things you've been wondering about, whatever. If you don't have any questions, no worries, you're going to stay. But if you'd like to, we'd love to just chat with you for a minute. Thanks.
Hey, Molly. Come on down here. Some money for the,
Oh, got some money for the pig.
okay. You want to go first? So I just wanted to say, yeah, Mark got it. So again, I know we appreciate the Maynard's restaurant so much, the Stevens family, Jack and Tom and everyone, and Molly here and the rest of the team. We appreciate what you guys do each week for us and make this a, you know, special place to meet. So thank you.
Yes.
Molly.
Thank you.
I wouldn't normally do this. You know that I came from Lakeville or the Lakeville Rotary Club, and there was a member of our club. We always did happy dollars at the end of our meeting. And there was this guy named, guy's name was Frank Shobin, and he was one of the charter members of the Lakeville Rotary. He died 7 years ago of cancer. But he was such an inspiration to that club. When there was prospective new members, if he saw any strange face at a meeting, he made a point to go over and greet them. But it was 7 years ago today when he died, and he had such an impact on me as just a new member. But I mean, he became everybody's best friend. At his funeral, our Rotary Club went to the front of the church and sang Amazing Grace, the whole club. And it's a club of 100 people. I mean, it was unbelievable. And it wasn't a dry eye in the place, including us. It was something else. But Frank always had this thing at the end. But he was kind of, you know, you think about the jock table. Well, he was at wherever Frank was sitting, that's where people wanted to sit. And this woman he always would sit next to him, would happen to be the president of the school board. And he would get up at the end of the meeting and see everybody to leave with a smile, and he'd tell a joke. And so after Frank died, that died with Frank, and it was kind of, so every once in a while, I'd hear a joke and okay, this one's in honor of Frank. Well, so today, in honor of Frank, got a couple for you. By the way, whistle, talk about the school board, but he would always get up and say, well, I checked with Judy to see if it was okay if I could tell this joke, because sometimes they were on the edge just a little bit. Sven and Oli, they've gone fishing. And Sven had gotten this fishing boat, and they're out there in the boat, and Oli's at the front of the boat messing around with something, and Sven's in the back steering the little fishing boat. And he said, Oli, what you doing up there? He said, oh, I bought this new thing called a thermos bottle. Sven says, I don't know what it is. He said, well, it's supposed to keep hot things hot and cold things cold. He said, huh, so what you got in it? He said, well, 2 cups of coffee and an ice cream bar. Okay, this one's on the edge. Look, little Jimmy comes running home from school. We were I said, Tommy, Mommy, the teacher asked a question today and I was the only one that knew the answer. Mom said, Jimmy, I'm so excited. I said, I'm so proud of you. What was the question? Well, the teacher asked, who farted?
How do you follow that?
How do we follow it? I didn't think that was gonna happen to me today. So we're gonna have a comedy hour now. So, thank you. With that, Paul, would you introduce our guest this morning?
Welcome, everyone, and great to see a big crowd out here. I am honored today to introduce Dave McLennan, who is the current executive chairman of the board and former president and CEO of Cargill that will be on the road there in Minnetonka. I don't claim to know all the successful leaders in this town, or even many of them, but I do know a few. And I can't tell you, I've never met anybody quite like Dave. And I just, some descriptors that I have for him that I know he won't want me to say this, but he is incredibly genuine. He's incredibly approachable. He's very humble, and he's got a great sense of humor. And I think that serves him well, not only running the Cargill, but in balancing his incredible family as well. So I also haven't worked for Dave, but I know a couple in the crowd who have, Brian Nye, Andy Punch in particular. And I honestly never heard a bad word about Dave. He might have, but I've heard nothing but great reviews, and knowing him, you know why. So now I just wanted to, before I start this interview, I wanted to just tell a few things about what took place under Dave's watch at Cargill. And again, he won't want me to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because he won't brag about himself. Okay, I'll make it quick. But under Dave's watch, and he ran the company from 2013 to 2022. And under his watch, the company grew at an annual growth rate of 21%, and to become a $165 billion company, which if public would be a Fortune 15 company. So think about that. That's incredible. And I think one of the things that I noticed about in reading about you in terms of the company, streamlined really an incredibly complex company and the organizational structure, and really paired a lot of slow growth or unprofitable businesses, and then invested in and grew businesses that set Cargill up very well for the future. And there were three major acquisitions in things like aquaculture and bioindustrial and animal nutrition. But I think most importantly for Dave, and I think he would agree with me on this, is that the things that don't show up necessarily in the numbers are perhaps what he's most proud of. He has an unrelenting dedication to a culture of safety in the company, which is just uncompromising. He has a dedication to a more diverse and inclusive and sustainable Cargill, and they made incredible strides on all those fronts. And he has a really genuine, and there's that word again, genuine dedication to the people of Cargill. So with that, I wanted to read a quote that I got. I'm not aware of it. You didn't. I like embarrassing you.
Doing well.
This was a quote. Dave was asked what his decision-making filter was during times of extreme stress. And his response was, our values. He said, in moments of crisis, you can't always wait for data. There isn't any. So we must lean into our values of doing the right thing, putting people first, and reaching higher. So I think that wraps all up. I don't know if we have to do an interview after that. But,
Good night.
So I want to start, this is a story about Cargill itself, but I'd love to have you, Dave, if you would, tell a little bit about yourself, your family, your outside interests, now that you have all this free time, and even your career path, okay? All in 5 minutes or less.
Sure, I'll do it in 1 minute. Well, good morning, and thanks for having me. I was with the Rotary Club about 4 years ago, so this is my second time with a group of Rotarians. Brian, where are you? My colleague from Cargill, Brian, and Andy's here too, I think, right? Hey, Andy. So it's good to see fellow Cargill faces in the audience. As Paul said, until January 1st, I was CEO of Cargill. I worked for Cargill for 32 years. You heard the title, executive chair of the board. I used to wonder what that meant. I'm still an employee. So if I was chair of the board, and some companies have that, you're not an employee. So I'm an active employee. I was in Brazil last week looking at some of our sustainability and agricultural projects that we're doing down there. But my primary job as executive chair is to manage the board of directors. So we have a traditional board of directors, like any public company, to work with Brian Sykes, my successor, to give him whatever support and knowledge I can from my time as CEO. Shareholders, Cargill has about 150 shareholders, so we are 95% family owned, the Cargill and McMillan families. You may know some of them live out in this area. We are seventh generation as a company, which if you ever read books about family companies, they typically last 2 generations. We are very unusual, 158 years old, founded in Conover, Iowa by W.W. Cargill, who had the vision to say the Midwest is growing, the East Coast needs food, so I can set up a railroad system to get grain from farmers, put it on a rail car and get it to the East Coast. 2 years later, they moved the rail out of Conover and Cargill was almost bankrupt. But he moved his business to a nearby town and we eventually migrated to being Minnesota based. As a company I'm intensely proud of, as Paul said, we are values based. We have a code of conduct that is active throughout the company, 160,000 employees, 70 countries where we do business. We sell into 125 different companies. We are truly international in scope. But as I said, being privately owned, we take a long-term view. I do believe we are values-based, but not always. 160,000 employees, somebody's going to do something wrong. But we correct it fast. And I used to think, anybody can be values-based, anybody can do the right thing, put people first. It's true, but not every company does. So it's one thing to have a value system and a value statement. It's another thing to do it. It's kind of like having a strategy. You can have a great strategy, but if you have lousy execution, what does it matter? And there's that saying that, great execution will overcome, good execution will overcome a lousy strategy any day. I also feel that way. You've got to have the value statement, but you've got to practice it. So that's it. My career, I started in Chicago at the Chicago Board of Trade, which is a futures market. As a runner and a phone clerk, I got my MBA at the University of Chicago. I met my wife in college. We went to Amherst College in Massachusetts. It's a small liberal arts school in Western Mass. She calls herself a recovering attorney. She doesn't practice law anymore. We moved to Minneapolis in '91 when I joined Cargill. I left Cargill for 2 years and went to work for Piper Jaffray, and then I came back to Cargill. I lived in London and Geneva. I ran our energy business, our financial business. And then as Paul said, I became CEO in 2013. My family, I have 3 kids. Son Jack, who lives here, works for the Minnesota Wild. I've got a daughter, Maggie, who lives in San Francisco and is a mental health counselor for 7th graders at a public school. And the story she tells, thank goodness for people like her and others who are in education and do that kind of work. A quick aside, she's engaged to be married. Her fiance works for Apple. And for the last 2 years, we said, so what are you working on? He has said, and he's from here. He has said, I can't tell you. And we're like, oh, come on, just tell us. Like, no, really, I can't tell you. Monday, you may have seen the announcement, and they've got a name for him. Vision Pro, thank you. That's what he's been working on for 2 years. So we'll see at $3,700 a pop. I'm not sure how many they're going to sell. So her fiance works for Apple, and then I've got a daughter, Catherine, who lives in Boston, who is with a digital marketing company, and then my wife, Kathleen.
Yes. Thank you. So in terms of Cargill, many of us have heard about Cargill. Unless you work there, I don't think you fully realize the scope of its businesses. You hit on this a little bit, its geographic reach or broader global impact. he tells a little bit more about the company, the impact it makes in people's lives, and I've always thought about this company feeds the world, it literally feeds the world, and that's just such an incredible statement, but also a burden, I would think, from making sure the company's doing that the right way.
Yeah, our statement of purpose is to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. So you heard Paul talk about safety as being one of the key components of our culture, with 160,000 employees, of which about half are in plants. They might be in the palm fields of Indonesia, down in the, working in the facilities in Brazil or around the world, cocoa fields in Western Africa. It's dangerous work. Things went well for me and on my watch. I failed at safety, meaning we never had a year, and I declared when I became CEO that I wanted to be the first CEO in Cargill history to have 0 fatalities, and that did not happen. That is still our goal. We're safer. Our reportable injury rate is down. Our lost time accident rate is down, but we haven't had a year with 0 fatalities so far. I like to say that in all likelihood, and you can't prove me wrong, but something you consume today, Cargill had some type of role in producing or getting to you. So for example, I don't see any sweeteners, but we make a sweetener which Brian knows well, called Trevia, all natural, high intensity sweet sweetener for your coffee. It's got a green and yellow sachet. We don't have any branded products, so you won't see our name on the products. If you see pick up Trevia, you'll see our name on the back. There's another fun fact: Kettle One vodka. But we make that alcohol. So I don't drink vodka, but when I do, I choose Kettle One. So I would ask you to do the same. But everything is, we feed 1/3 of the world's salmon. We have a poultry business, we used to have a pork business, but between animal nutrition, ag supply chain, so getting crops out of the fields onto a rail, barge, truck, or boat to feed livestock around the world, we've probably had a role in something that you've consumed today. So I think being privately owned, not having a brand, many people, especially outside of Minnesota, have not heard of us. I think with that comes some misperceptions. And I think being big and also being in sensitive environmental regions of the world, Brazil, West Africa, Indonesia, being in agriculture, we do get criticized by NGOs for either not doing more to slow down climate change or climate volatility. And we are at the center of it. And I mentioned our statement of purpose: to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. Sustainability is a huge area of focus for us. I mentioned I was in Brazil last week, reviewing all the sustainability and regenerative agriculture projects that we're doing in that country. So I think if you didn't know what Cargill did, is food ingredients, animal protein. So we're the 3rd largest beef producer in this country. But think about beef. You go into the grocery store, you don't buy beef by brand, right? You buy it by either lean content or the cut. But we're the 3rd biggest beef producer in this country. We're one of the biggest poultry producers in the world. And I mentioned we feed salmon, honeysuckle white turkey. That's Cargill. So again, you wouldn't know that because it's like Cargill honeysuckle white. It's honeysuckle white, but if you look on the label, so we intentionally keep a low profile. We want to focus on our job, our customers, their customers, you consumers, and just kind of keep our heads down and do the right thing.
Excellent. Let's talk about challenges. There are a few in the last 3 years in particular. Navigated through disruption and market volatility and that little thing called COVID. And you touched on a little bit on this, but looking forward, what are some of the big challenges facing the food system right now, and how is Cargill navigating those challenges and helping resolve them?
I had the privilege of having a job for 9 years. The last 3 were the hardest, the most challenging, the most unpredictable. COVID, inflation, supply chain disruptions, and then Russia invading Ukraine. And I often think sometimes better lucky than good. I'm really glad those all didn't happen in my first 3 years. I don't know if I'd be sitting here talking to you today. Who knows how life turns out, but it's kind of a lesson, right? You don't know how your life's gonna go. It's not linear and it's not expected. And I always love that phrase, person plans and God laughs. You can't plan your life, and I could never plan for that. You know, COVID, as you all know, we were all impacted, and you had mentioned in one of those quotes from, I think it was an article in the Tribune. There was no playbook. And I've often said about leadership that I think the key to effective leadership is pattern recognition. That you either lived something before, or you've seen something in someone's behavior, or in something that you experienced, think, okay, I've seen this before, and I know how to anticipate it, or I'm gonna get out in front of it. COVID, there wasn't any playbook. And as I said, there wasn't any data, but every single day, where are we having outbreaks? One of our beef plants feeds 23 million people a day. So if we close down a beef plant, I'm sure you saw spot shortages of soup, of beef, of everything in your grocery market shelf. And we had a lot of pressure on this. We had the federal government calling out saying, you've got to get that plant open. We had state governments. But our filter was, are we keeping our employees safe? And if we were when we were monitoring COVID outbreaks in the plant, at a certain point, like, we had to shut this down. And so that was always our filter. And I felt that going through that, if you use your values as your filter, you're going to make the right decision. It might not appear that way at the time. But that's what we did. I think on supply chain disruptions, that was the same thing, is with being a big company and being adaptable. I think it's another key to successful business. How well do you adapt? How resilient are you as a person? And how resilient are you as a company? How much can you change and react to situations that come at you with no notice? Like Russia invading Ukraine. Nobody knew that was going to happen. So what do you do? And we have 2,500 employees in Russia. We have 500 employees in Ukraine. We are still operating in both countries today. But again, it's how do we keep our employees safe? How do we do the right thing? And for us, getting grain out of Ukraine, getting cash into Ukraine to help the farmers there sustain their business, keep the agricultural supply system going. Ukrainian products like sunflower seeds, wheat, corn, goes to East Africa, Middle East, Turkey. So our job, nourishing the world, that is our job. But some days you're like, okay, how do I manage this? There isn't a playbook. You've got to have, I think you've got to have the emotional constitution. You have the stomach for stuff that comes at you, and try and figure it out without saying, you know, who do I call? And when you're a CEO, you're not calling your board and say, hey, what am I going to do? What should I do? You got to make the call, and that's your job as a leader.
Excellent. So along those lines, CEO, you shouldered a ton of responsibility in your role. What kept you up at night? And how did you prepare for and manage through unexpected crises? Now you kind of hit on that already in terms of, but what did keep you up at night? You always appeared to me to be a pretty cool customer, but I'm sure when you're with yourself at night, it's a little different story.
I know that's a metaphorical question when you said that. I had no trouble sleeping, and I not because I didn't worry about things, but I just had a constitution that when I lay down, I fell asleep. And I went to the Guthrie last night, and I only slept 5 minutes. Hope there's nobody from the Guthrie here, but I had a gift, and I think sometimes being successful in business or in life is just how you're wired and how you take stress and how you manifest stress. For me, it was about our employees safe. And every morning I would wake up at 5 and I go to my phone. And I know a lot of us are addicted to our phones and, are always on them and always looking for information. Well, that's how I started my day. And I always kind of cringed, like, did we have somebody with a fatality or an injury or something bad? And that, I miss a lot of aspects of the job, of the CEO job, that I don't miss. I always worried about, are people safe and did we have a fatality or a serious injury? So that was number one, but I also think one of the hardest things about leading a big company is how do you keep growing? And, you know, you mentioned the growth statistics. As you all know, simple laws of math, the bigger your company gets, the bigger a number like 10% gets. You've always got to be thinking about, how do I perpetuate the future? And I said once to the companies that the results we're having today are the results of decisions we made 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And I felt an incredible responsibility. I've got this 158-year-old company that I'm responsible for. And I did have one director on my very first day said, you got two things to think about as CEO. One is, and I'll paraphrase what he said, don't screw it up. And second is leave it better than when you got here. It's pretty simple when you think about it, but I always felt, how can I make the company better for the next, I was the 9th CEO in Cargill's history, Brian Sykes is the 10th. It's an incredible responsibility, and I realize now you kind of get, remember that story about the frog in boiling water? You know, you turn up the heat a little bit, you get used to it, but you got to make sure you get out before you boil to death, because the heat gets hotter. I realize now you just learn to live with it. But I think the responsibility of leading a big, large, long-term important company is one that I didn't appreciate, that I didn't keep me up at night, but you carry it around. That kind of a job, it is 24 hours, it is 7 days. There's never a day that I was relaxed about it, or that I didn't think about it much.
So along those lines, and this is a question that I think is really critical to success, obviously, but strong leaders surround themselves with great people, which I know you did. And what are some of the qualities you think about when you pick a team, and what expectations do you have of them as leaders? I think you did a great job with this particular element of your leadership.
Thank you. You had mentioned at the beginning, Paul, in your very generous and long-winded introduction. Diversity, DEI, diversity is very, very important to me. As I came into the job, I thought I had 5 things I wanted to get done. One was safety, one was diversity. So I've told this, when I first joined the leadership team with Cargill in 2008, there were 8 Caucasian men, mostly from North America, 2 from Europe. And of those 8, 4 were named Dave. So we didn't even have name diversity. So I got a nickname D-Mac because it was like, Dave, you're like, okay, which one? Which are the 4 of us you're talking about today? The leadership team that I and Brian and his, as he was COO today, 13 people, 7 women, 6 men, 2 of color. I challenge anybody to find a large Fortune 20 equivalent company that has those type of demographics, especially more women than men. And it's great to look out into a Rotary audience and see the gender diversity that I'm seeing. Because I remember when I went, no disrespect to Edina at Rotary, there was not that as much diversity as I see here today. I think that's what makes a great company, is to have diversity of thought, perspective, experience. And that was something I worked hard to get to have persons of color and have gender diversity. And that's why I think we've been fortunate enough to have the success that we've had. I think the second is you've got to have people on your team that are not afraid to tell you when something's wrong or that you've done a lousy job. There was one woman on the team who was a good friend of mine. And I remember once I did a town hall and she called up and said, "Dad, you were horrible." Okay. Tell me more, why? But that's what I expected. And I think when you get to be a CEO, your jokes get funnier, you have more friends you didn't expect to have, and it goes the other way, by the way, when you leave the post. But things are filtered on their way out, and you've got to have people who tell you the truth. And you've got to have people who will be candid, and you've got to create a culture where problems get surfaced quickly. Unlike wine, problems do not age well with time. They get really bad, and if they don't get to you, and there's not legendary, but if you've read books about what's happened to GE, and there's all kinds of books, but one of the quotes that I remember was that the top leadership didn't like bad news. And people were hesitant or reluctant to bring the bad news. You've got to have the bad news. There's a lot of it. But you've got to sustain and create a culture and have a team that is not afraid to speak candidly to you and honestly. And that, I think, I know this is how we have modeled our leadership team.
When you, just a follow-up, did you move people out some of those games and others? And what was the basis for that? Was it a feel as much as it was their performance, or how did you go on making those determinations?
Yeah, I mean, I was CFO at the time, but the team that I inherited, I mean, some of it's feel and some of it is people say, okay, change in leadership, I'm gonna move on too. But I think I think a lot of this chemistry.
Yeah.
And I think when people say, okay, new person comes in, you know, I miss the old person, you know, it's time for me to go, or you just feel this, for where I want to take the company and the kind of things I want to do, you need different skills. I think one of the I don't know if fallacies is the right word, but one of the mistakes that sometimes boards make or companies make in picking a new leader is they reward the person with new responsibility that has done really well in the last, let's say, 5 years. That's a lagging indicator of success. You want a leader who is going to lead you and help you be successful for the next 5 years. And the skills that created success over the last 5 years might not be the same. So you really got to be forward thinking about your leadership selections, but also for me, the leadership team I inherited when I became CEO was also all Caucasian men. And that's when we started moving towards a team that was more diverse. But it's not just gender and ethnicity, it's also how do you think, are introvert, extrovert, because you work in a protein business, animal nutrition, financial business. Diversity of thought and experience is just as important as diversity of your culture, your ethnicity, and your gender.
So last question before we take questions from the audience. How about the new guy, Brian? Tell us a little bit about him.
I will. Brian Sykes, he's worked at Cargill his whole career. He came out of our protein business. He lives in Medina. He was born in Florida, lived there till he was 12, moved to Texas, went to Texas Tech, got 4 kids, 4 grandchildren, maybe 3. He's a great person, and I said it, he will be the best leader we've ever had at Cargill. He is honest, he has high integrity, he has great character, he has great followers. And so we ran a process where we evaluated different candidates. And I was saying to somebody yesterday, succession planning, leadership succession does not always go well. So there's some really high profile examples in the press today. First one's at CNN. So Jeff Zucker left CNN and his successor, and they've just written a huge article about this guy, and Zucker, his predecessor, is kind of subordinating him from what you read behind the scenes. Second is Disney. So Bob Iger came back after 2 years. If I go back, number one is I won't go back. I would not, unless something terrible were to happen, which I'm not going to. And that's one of the reasons you have an executive chair, is just provide help with the transition, but just in case. But at a certain point in time, you should promote from within if you've done good succession planning. So we ran a process that started a couple of years ago that looked at several internal candidates, and Brian rose to the top based on his leadership, the way he ran the protein business, his followership, but it's, just a balance of skills and qualities that these are tough jobs. But as I said, we had a CEO years ago that was in the chair for about 3 years, which is a short period of time. If you do the math, 10 CEOs on 158 averages about 16 years. It doesn't always go well. And I think boards take it very seriously. And you should, and really there's 2 really big responsibilities of a board. I mean, there's many, but one is CEO succession. And the other is if you're a public company and you get a takeover bid, do we take it or not? Fiduciary, leadership, other things, that's standard of every board, but those are the two big ones. And I think our board, we did a good job of selecting Brian. He is and will be a great CEO of Cargill.
Excellent. Okay, so please yell the questions out because we only have one microphone. I think I saw Doug first.
Could you share with us the extent of your involvement in helping in Ukraine?
Yeah.
And their grain production?
And thanks for the question, Doug. And I was remiss in starting off by thanking you all because I think some of your fundraising or efforts have gone to support Ukraine. Am I right? For the global Rotary. Yeah, so thank you to the Rotary organization. Last year, we gave $70 million into Ukraine for humanitarian relief. We helped over 300 people get out of Ukraine into Poland and Romania. So none of the men can leave. I should say none of the men, I think it's 18 to 62 can leave. So they were mostly women, family members, friends. And then we have not abandoned the country. As I mentioned, we are still buying Ukrainian agricultural products, getting them on ships, getting them into Africa, Middle East to try to keep the ag economy going. It's a very upsetting situation. We've seen pictures of our employees working in the basement during air raids, but we've told them we are there to stay. We will support and help rebuild the ag economy. It's a very important agricultural region of the world. I've been there. We lost our oilseed crush facility to the Russian army about last August, almost a year ago. So they seized it, but we're still operating there in terms of basic ag supply chains, and we will continue to be there.
I would imagine that your new job is important because of the nature of your shareholders.
Yeah.
How does that engage in terms of when you talk about change and the dynamics there to lead them along and
Yeah.
helping the new company grow?
That's a good question, Chuck, which was how do you manage the shareholders in terms of transition? And I've always said I've had a love-hate relationship with change. Yeah, it's hard to go through change. You know, we all like our routine. We all like, knowing feeling like we know what's gonna happen next, but the one constant is change. And we all know that. I'm sure you've all had tremendous change in your life, starting with COVID. But part of it is the shareholder base. And so one of the things we do in succession planning is we don't typically have a chief operating officer, but when we're getting ready for transition, we name the chief operating officer as a way to say to the company, here's the next CEO. So Brian was COO for 2 years. I was COO for a little over 2 years. And then it's your job to lose. Some companies say, hey, here's the new CEO, and you really didn't see it coming. But we don't do that. So it's a way to prepare the organization, the employees, customers, and the shareholder base. But my job is to work with the shareholders, and especially in the first year, to get a sense for, how are you hearing the new leader? How are you experiencing her or him? And, what can I do to either explain it or to give Brian the feedback of they want to hear more about this, or you said this and here's how it was received. But I consider that my job is to smooth this transition with customers. And so I've introduced him to all our major customer CEOs relationships I've been able to build in the last 10 years, our shareholder base, and our competitors. As you get to know your market and your competitor base, you need to know who's on the other side of the table if you're doing a negotiation. So I have been working with our shareholders to help Brian, but that's my job. How can I make him the best CEO in Cargill history and set him up for success?
Sure.
So moving out of that CEO seat,
Yeah.
and then into that executive chair, what sort of mental shift did you need to do so that you don't feel like you're making decisions or you want to make decisions?
Yeah. So Jen's question about the transition out of the CEO seat into the executive chair role, I would say this: number one, it was harder than I expected. It was very emotional. I made the decision that I was not going to have an office in our building. So we're over here on McGinty Road in, it's technically Minnetonka, And I thought, I gotta get out of there. I mean, I don't want to have a presence, a physical presence. And number two is, you know, I want to be available to him, but I don't want to still have my fingers in as much as I like, well, I wonder what's going on today. And so I found it was a transition from when he became COO, and I gave him all the operating businesses as a direct report. And it was very strange because you spend your career saying, you know, give me more. How can I'd like a bigger challenge. You know, I want to take on more responsibility. And then you get this day when you're giving it away, which is not natural in those kind of careers. And that was strange. And so it was I'll call it a 2-year transition, but also the day you walk out of there, you're like, wow. But on the other hand, I'm still the chair, so I'm still, you know, go in the office if needed. But I think a incumbent or a former CEO's job is to clear out, give the new CEO as much responsibility and space as possible. You don't want to still be sending emails like, well, how much money did we make in our meat business last month? That's not your business anymore. But at the same time, have a very open and trusting relationship with your successor. So Brian and I communicate one way or the other, probably about once a week. We travel together, as I mentioned, you know, transitioning relationships. But I would never be in the background, like I mentioned with CNN, or supposedly if you read what's in the press is true, criticizing him or saying, well, I would have done that. You know, I can't believe he's making those decisions. And I had some of that. So we sold our pork business, we sold our financial business, we sold our metals business, and I got some feedback. It wasn't from my predecessor by any means. But some alumni were like, wow, he's destroying Cargill. I can't believe they're doing that. And probably the more famous story, famous in Cargill walls, we had this place called the Lake Office, which was this old chateau that we converted to a headquarters. And man, it was stuffy. It was, nobody came over there, and we had about 80 people, and it was an old, big old mansion. It was right down the road from us. And so we vacated it, and we ended up tearing it down. And we had a lot of alumni saying, I can't believe they tore down the Lake Office. Every generation of leadership has its own traditions and things they want to do. And you should respect that and not take it personally like, oh, wow, that's something I put in place. He's going to change things, and that's okay. So I think it requires a lot of openness and not personalizing. But it is, make no doubt about it, when you leave a big job like this, it is not easy. But you've got to think what's best for the company and not what is best for me, and not let your ego be involved.
Catherine?
I've got that.
A quick question on what's next. At one point,
Yeah.
Cargill wasn't in the stevia business.
Right.
What are you keeping your eye on, and what are you excited about?
So what Catherine's question about what are we keeping our eye on, what's next? Bioindustrials, Paul mentioned that in the introduction. So replacing petroleum derived products with agriculture derived products. So it's biodiesel, it's sustainable aviation fuel that's going to be made from canola oil seeds, soy, canola, sunflower. We've made a number of acquisitions in this space, so ingredients in cosmetics, in soaps that again come from ag and not from petroleum-based products. The gray transformer boxes on electric poles had petroleum products in it, they still do. We make a fluid from ag products that lasts longer, it's not corrosive, it's not flammable, it's less flammable. And it's more sustainable. So I think sustainably produced products from agriculture is number one. We're investing significantly in salmon, so the world's going to eat more fish and less beef. Although it's interesting, we are in the pea protein business and plant protein business. That got a lot of press about in the last couple of years. It's not taken off. I mean, it's about 5%. We had always thought it would be about 5%. People still want to eat chicken, beef, turkey. And then human nutrition. So ingredients that are good for your digestive health, for your biology, things that can be micro ingredients, which in the same way we're doing that for animal nutrition, we'll do it for human nutrition. So future ingredients and using food as a force for good health, but also for a good, healthy environment as well. So that's what the next 10 years. And of course, And the other thing, I'm good at nonverbal communication and picking up signals. I think Mark's telling me it's time to stop. Don't know if I'm right or not. No, we can even, but the one thing AI. Anybody get this figured out?
No.
That's another one, like, I'm glad I don't have to think about that as much as I do. Like, what is that gonna mean? For Cargill, for our kids, for our us, for the world, I don't know. So, thanks for.
Thank you.
Dave, thanks for your leadership in the community and at Cargill, and thank you very much for coming here and sharing the story today. I really appreciate it. And sure you can hang around a little bit maybe for some other questions, but as an expression of our appreciation, we made a donation to the International Foundation of the Rotary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
So in wrapping up, next week we have Scott Schafel, owner of the Discover Yourself. The week after, Jasmine Durrell, CEO of Allianz. And then the last week in June, Pam Langseth will be doing a recap of the year. So with that, make it a great week.